arrived in Hanoi February 16th after 32 hours of travel from the United States. Our first impression was that it was a bustling metropolitan area. We noted that people traveled with scooters rather than automobiles. We started our tour of Hanoi Saturday at the Temple of Literature. Our North Vietnamese guide gave us a lecture prior to entering the temple. There were a lot of school field trips to the temple on our visit that day. Interestingly, to the children and to the young people up to college age, we were rock stars. The children waved at us and wanted to touch us. The young people wanted their pictures taken with us. The Temple of Literature was first constructed in 1070. The temple is dedicated to Confucius. It does house the Imperial Academy, which was Vietnam's first national university. We then traveled to the Presidential Palace. This was built between 1900 and 1906 to house the French Governor General of Indochina. This is currently the residence of the President of Vietnam. This is Ho Chi Minh's cottage. When Vietnam gained independence in 1954, it is said that Ho Chi Minh refused to live in the Grand Presidential Palace. Rather, he chose to live in a traditional Vietnamese stilt house with a carp pond on the grounds. Note that the Presidential Palace and the stilt house are all within walking distance to each other, as is the one-pillar pagoda and Ho Chi Minh's mausoleum. The one-pillar pagoda is a Buddhist temple built in 1049 by the Emperor Li Daitong in gratitude for the birth of his son. This is a mausoleum which is the final resting place for the revolutionary leader Ho Chi Minh, who died in 1969. Ho Chi Minh's body is actually on display in the mausoleum. Across the street is the Vietnam National Assembly. The mausoleum is located at the center of Ba Dinh Square, which includes the Presidential Palace, Ho Chi Minh's cottage, the one-pillar pagoda, and of course the mausoleum and the General Assembly. This is the Hao Lo prison in downtown Hanoi. It was known by the American pilots that were shot down and captured during the Vietnam War as the Hanoi Hilton. The Vietnamese presented the prison as it was used to house political prisoners by the French during the French colonization of Vietnam. They demonstrated the abuses of the French towards the Vietnamese, including keeping prisoners in leg irons. Tortures and executions were done by the French. Thus, the exhibit of the guillotine. They portrayed the care of the American prisoners of war as like a summer camp. In the evening, we traveled through the old quarter of Hanoi on our way to the water puppet show. Water puppetry started in the rice-growing regions of northern Vietnam about 1,000 years ago. At that time, villagers staged water puppet performances to celebrate the end of the rice harvest, at religious festivals, or just simply for fun. The Thang Long Water Puppet Troupe was established in 1969 by the Hanoi People's Committee. On February 19th, we traveled to Ha Long Bay. On the way, we stopped to watch farming the rice paddies. The countryside from Hanoi to Ha Long Bay was mostly rural, with farming in many rice paddies. There were also areas of isolated factories. We went past one Samsung factory which employed over 100,000 people. Halong Bay is in the Gulf of Tonkin and is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The bay has thousands of limestone isles and karst of various shapes and sizes, and that's what gives it its interest. And that's what I have a lot of pictures of. Karst are a type of topography formed from the dissolution of soluble rocks such as limestone, dolomite, and gypsum. Tien Con Cave was not discovered until 1993 when desperate fishermen who were caught in a storm were looking for shelter. They noticed that monkeys were going in and out of a certain area in the rock, and they followed them into the cave. The Vin Pearl Resort sat on its own island in Halong Bay. Sadly, we were only there for about 12 hours, and it was too cool to really enjoy all the features of the resort. On our way to Hanoi to catch our plane to Ho Chi Minh City, we did take a walking tour of the local wet market next to Halong Bay. Much of their seafood was not yet killed and was preserved alive prior to sale. While in the market, we were often pushed aside by motorbikes and scooters demanding the right-of-way. We also stopped at a pearl farm along the way. They showed us how they culture the pearls. They also showed us how they harvest the pearls. We started our tour of Saigon with a drink at the bar at the rooftop of the Rex Hotel. The Rex Hotel was famous during the Vietnam War as this was the site of the United States Military Command's daily press conference. This was named the 5 O'Clock Follies by journalists who felt that the optimism of the American officers was misguided. The rooftop bar was a well-known hangout for military officials and war correspondents. We then toured Saigon. The People's Committee building was built around 1889 and finished in 1909. Its original use was as the Hotel de Ville during the French colonial period. During the South Vietnamese government, this was used as City Hall. The building now houses the City People's Committee, the City People's Council, and the People's Court. Sadly, it is not open to the public. Independence Palace, also known as the Reunification Convention Hall, was originally built around 1962 as the workplace and home of the President of then Republic of Vietnam. This is the site of the fall of Saigon on April 30, 1975 that ended the Vietnamese War, when a North Vietnamese army tank crashed through its gates. It is now a historical monument and open for tour. These American aircraft, which were used during what we call the Vietnam War, were exhibited outside the War Remnants Museum. The museum was originally an exhibit started in 1975, which was called the Exhibition House for U.S. and Puppet War Crimes. This was later known as the Museum of Chinese and American War Crimes. The name was changed in 1990 to the Exhibition House for Crimes of War and Aggression. In 1995, following the normalization of diplomatic relationships with the United States under President Clinton, the name of the museum was changed to the War Remnants Museum. The exhibitions inside the museum are primarily pictures of atrocities committed on Vietnamese civilians by the Americans during what we call the Vietnam War and what they called the American War, and by the French and the Chinese and other wars. There's also pictures of birth defects attributed to Agent Orange. To those of us that followed the history of the Vietnam War during the time of the war, there is not any new information. One thing that I would have liked to have seen, but I suspect that is in a different museum, is a strategy that the North Vietnamese used during the war in order to achieve victory. The main strategic things that were noted or seen at the Remnant Museum were primarily errors of strategy and implementation by the U.S. during the war, including atrocities committed and brutality used in trying to achieve these goals. The Cu Chi tunnels are an extensive network of tunnels running underneath the Cu Chi district just northwest of Saigon. Our bus trip to take us to the park exhibiting the tunnels is only about 35 miles long. During the Vietnam-American War, the tunnels were used to house Viet Cong troops, which were the guerrilla fighters from South Vietnam combating the Americans, for transportation of communication of supplies, to lay booby traps, and to mount surprise attacks. The tunnel construction actually was begun in the late 1940s during the War of Independence of Vietnam with the French colonial authority. These were greatly expanded during the American Vietnam War to a distance of over 150 miles, which stretches all the way from the outskirts of Saigon to the Cambodian border. As we explored the jungle around the tunnels and ventured through the tunnels themselves, I could only imagine what it would be like living in the tunnels and then having to stick your head out to attack American or Allied troops. Likewise, I can imagine the fear of American troops walking through the jungle not knowing where the Viet Cong might be hiding. The Americans and Australians developed a group of specially trained fighters known as tunnel rats, which could go into the tunnels looking for booby traps and Viet Cong. I can't imagine their fear and anxiety doing this. Certainly, given how well hidden these tunnels could be, what would be a great strategic advantage to the combatants in battle. The difficult problem for the Viet Cong, however, was that they lived in these tunnels all the time in order to escape the American troops, and certainly the area was cramped, food and air were lacking, and disease was rampant. Malaria actually took a large number of the Vietnamese troops in these tunnels. There are also displays of the booby traps that the Viet Cong used to ensnare the American troops. This is an example of a swinging door booby trap in which one would step on the platform or swinging door and be dropped into a pit with spikes. Sometimes they would put poison or venom on the tips of the spikes. Sometimes they would put poisonous animals such as snakes or spiders in the pit. On Thursday, February 23rd, we boarded the Avalon Saigon, the riverboat, and began our journey up the Mekong River. The river at that point was remarkable for the volume of commercial traffic. There were multiple commercial ships, barges, fishing boats, and it was somewhat amazing that our captain could navigate these without collision. There was a lot of debris in the water, and in addition, a lot of water hyacinths. The water hyacinth is actually an invasive plant which can clog waterways. However, it does have beneficial uses and is used for weaving rattan type of stuff. Since the year 2000, people in the Mekong region have used it to make rattan type wares, furniture, etc. As we went up the river, we encountered fish farms along the banks. We saw a lot of sand mining from the bottom of the river as we cruised upstream. I have found reports that this has bad environmental consequences for the area. Specifically, there is shore erosion and people have lost houses. In addition, there is a decrease of fish stocks hurting the local food supply. By the next day, February 24th, there were still a lot of activity on the river, however not as many large barges or ships. We did see many fishermen. At the end of the day, farmers would bring their oxen down to the river to wash them. Our first stop on the Mekong River in Vietnam was Vinh Long. Here we had a presentation of some of the rice products that can be made. Rice paper is used for spring rolls, or when made thicker is used for chips. They did demonstrate popped rice cooking for us. The final product was like Rice Krispies. They then would mix it with stuff like chocolate and make candies. These were sort of like Rice Krispie treats.
Okay, for the first filter, first will be brought back over here for a filter. Okay? Of course, they have to feel good exercise, right? Very good exercise.
They also made rice whiskey. The product that we sampled was infused with a snake, which some people believe can improve health and virility according to traditional Chinese medicine. Lastly, they demonstrated the manufacture of coconut candy. They did have several snakes on display. We don't believe that these were used in the manufacture of the Vietnamese snake whiskey, rather were kept as pets. In the afternoon we arrived at Cù Lao Gien, or Isle of Gien. We did have a demonstration of the handcrafting of wooden sampan boats. This is a dying business as more and more people are buying fiberglass sampans. There was a demonstration of bending the wood and caulking. We took tuk-tuks to tour the island and to have a demonstration of conical hat production. The Cù Lao Gien Church is a Roman Catholic church. It was the first church in Cochin, China, and now is one of the biggest parishes in the Mekong area. In Vietnam, about 45% of the people practice folk religions such as ancestor worship or worship of local deities. About 16% of the population is Buddhist and about 8% of the population is Christian. 30% are unaffiliated with any religion. Given that Vietnam is officially a communist, it is officially an atheist state. In order to be a member of the Communist Party, one cannot have any religion. Chau Dac was our last stop in Vietnam. We crossed the border into Cambodia after this. It was here that we boarded a sampan and took a cruise up the river to the Baha Chua Zu, the Lady of the Land Temple, the Temple of Lady Zu. During travel we encountered stilt houses. These are the type of houses that are lost because of sand dredging in the Mekong River, rice mills where the rice husk was removed, fishermen, a duck farmer. This is the face of Buddha that is being carved into a mountain. When we disembarked our boat and walked up to the Temple of Lady Zu, the streets were quite busy. There was almost a carnival-like atmosphere. Ba Chua means landlady. Our guide referred to her as Lady Zu. This is one of the local deities that are worshipped in Vietnam. The legend is that Lady Zu was a young girl who was torn to death hundreds of years ago. After her death, her soul helps the good villagers and chastises the bad. Further legend has it that about 200 years ago, the people of Chau Dac discovered the statue of Lady Zu at the top of Sand Mountain and wanted to bring it down. However, dozens of young men tried to carry the statue down, but could not. Then Lady Zu told the young lady that only 9 virgins were needed to carry it down. They did this, and when they reached the foot of the mountain, the statue became very heavy, and they could not walk anymore. People believe that she chose this place to live, and that is where the shrine was set up to worship. There was a lot of activity at the temple, with people bringing in offerings, praying, and tourists wandering in and out. Tables were set up for the offerings. There was a lot of commerce going on at the site also, as people were selling items for offering. One favorite was a pig. People could purchase the pig, and these were the ones that had a knife stuck in the back. Or the pigs could be rented for offering, in which case they would not have a knife. They were carrying these in and out during our time visiting the shrine. Kathy was almost knocked down by one. Watching this activity reminded me of the story of Jesus and the money changers at the temple. In the afternoon, we visited a different part of Chau Dac. One thing we found in villages in Vietnam and Cambodia was that whole villages seemed to be involved in the manufacture of the same goods. These were home shops, not factories, but everybody was producing the same thing. The village that we visited in the afternoon was involved in the weaving. We could hear the weaving machines clacking away as we walked through the town. At the home we visited, a demonstration was given with the old hand-powered weaving machine, and then a power machine was demonstrated. Hello, Xin Chao. Our last visit in Vietnam was with a Viet Cong vet. He was involved with the Viet Cong from 1966 to 1973. Initially, he was a nurse in the field hospital. He then went on to be a medic in the field. He did state as a medic that he treated mostly Viet Cong. However, he would also treat South Vietnamese soldiers and American soldiers if he found them wounded on the battlefield. He did note that many times when he got to soldiers, they were already dead. He did not have any anger or antipathy towards the Americans. Rather, he was very glad to see us. He stated that our presence here showed that we could reconcile. The uniform that he was wearing when he visited us had many medals on it. When asked what these medals were for, he stated that they were years of service as a member of the Communist Party. His highest medal had a 50 on it.